She wasn't just missing, she was erased. One cold October night in 2004, Sarah Whitcomb clocked out from the St. Jude Medical Center and began her 7-mile drive home. She never made it. For 18 years, her disappearance haunted her family, her friends, and the entire town of Bridgewater, Oregon. Police files closed, evidence disappeared, and theories ran wild. But last spring, a demolition team stumbled upon a sealed attic inside a foreclosed home, and what they found would rewrite everything. What if the person everyone trusted the most was the one hiding the truth all along? The rain fell in steady sheets across Bridgewater that October night, droplets catching in the amber glow of street lights that lined Route 16. Headlights from passing cars created momentary halos in the mist before disappearing around the bend, leaving nothing but darkness behind. This was the route Sarah Whitcomb had driven hundreds of times before, the same stretch of asphalt that had carried her safely between work and home for 3 years without incident. Until tonight. At 11:17 p.m. on October 14, 2004, security footage captured Sarah walking through the employee exit of St. Jude Medical Center. She pulled her raincoat tighter around her shoulders, her steps quick and purposeful across the wet pavement toward the staff parking lot. The camera caught her slight wave to someone off-screen before she disappeared from view. It was the last confirmed sighting of 27-year-old Sarah Whitcomb. The first person to notice something wrong wasn't family or police. It was Diane Murphy, the charge nurse for the morning shift. When Sarah failed to arrive for her 7 a.m. rotation, Diane assumed she was running late. By 7:30, mild annoyance had shifted to concern. Sarah had never missed a shift without calling in. By noon, hospital administration had left 3 messages on Sarah's home phone and one with her emergency contact. Her younger sister, Rachel. She was never late for anything, Rachel would later tell detectives. Not for work, not for dinner, not for phone calls she'd promised to make. It just wasn't who she was. Rachel drove to her sister's apartment that afternoon to find it exactly as Sarah had left it the day before. Bed made with hospital corners, breakfast dishes drying on the rack, a novel splayed open on the nightstand with a bookmark placed precisely at page 137. Nothing suggested Sarah had planned to leave. Her toothbrush remained in its holder. Her medication sat on the bathroom counter. Even her favorite sweater hung on the back of a kitchen chair, as if she'd just stepped out and would return at any moment. When Rachel reported her sister missing at 6:42 p.m., just shy of 20 hours after Sarah had last been seen, Officer Helen Lewis took the report with practiced efficiency. Lewis was new to Bridgewater Police Department, having transferred from Portland only 3 months prior. She'd handled 4 missing persons cases in her 8-year career, all of which had resolved within days. Adults went missing temporarily. They had arguments, took impulsive trips, stayed with friends after too many drinks. They came back. "Has your sister been depressed lately?" Lewis asked, pen poised above her notepad. Rachel shook her head firmly. "Sarah's steady as they come. She's a nurse, for God's sake. She's the one who takes care of everyone else. Boyfriend troubles? Financial stress?" Again, Rachel dismissed the possibilities. Sarah had broken up with her last boyfriend 6 months ago, an amicable split that left them on good terms. She had no debt beyond student loans, which she was steadily paying down. "She just bought a new coffee maker," Rachel said, her voice cracking slightly. "People don't buy new appliances when they're planning to disappear." The first significant development came just after midnight, when Patrol Officer Jason Reeves spotted a silver Honda Accord parked on the shoulder of Route 16, approximately 2 miles from Sarah's apartment. The car was locked, its interior immaculate. No signs of struggle, no skid marks on the pavement nearby. Sarah's purse sat on the passenger seat, containing her wallet, ID, and $87 in cash. Her phone wasn't there, but her hospital badge was, placed neatly atop her closed purse, as if set there deliberately. The detail that caught Officer Lewis's attention wasn't what was found, but what was missing. Sarah's keys. They weren't in the ignition, on the seat, or dropped on the floor. They weren't in the trunk or under the car. They had simply vanished. "This doesn't make sense," Lewis murmured, scanning the pristine interior with her flashlight. "The door's locked, but the keys are gone." Her partner, Officer Tanner, shrugged. Maybe she had a spare set at home, or gave one to a friend. But Rachel confirmed there was no spare. Sarah kept a single key ring with her car key, apartment key, and a small silver wolf charm her father had given her before he died. The location of the car itself presented another puzzle. Route 16 was the direct path between the hospital and Sarah's apartment complex, a straight shot that should have taken her less than 15 minutes to drive, even in the rain. Yet her car was found on a stretch with no obvious reason to stop. There were no businesses, no rest areas, not even a scenic overlook. Just asphalt bordered by dense woods on one side and a steep embankment leading to Clearwater Creek on the other. When the forensics team processed the vehicle the following morning, they found the radio paused mid-song, Fleetwood Mac's "Sarah," a track Sarah often played because of the similar name. The gas tank was 3/4 full. The driver's seat was positioned closer to the pedals than would be comfortable for someone of Sarah's height. And while fingerprints covered the expected surfaces, steering wheel, door handles, glove compartment, they all belonged to Sarah. The car had been wiped clean of anyone else's presence. "It's too clean," Lewis noted in her initial report. No mud tracked in despite the rain, no coffee cup in the holder, though co-workers confirmed she always brought one for the drive home. It feels staged. Within days, the preliminary investigation had yielded a puzzling picture of the night's events. Sarah had completed her shift normally. She'd chatted with colleagues in the break room, discussed a challenging patient with the incoming nurse, and mentioned plans to watch a movie over the weekend. Nothing suggested distress or deviation from routine. The last person to see her was Mark Daniels, a fellow nurse who had worked alongside Sarah for nearly 4 years. Mark described walking Sarah to her car, as he often did after late shifts. "We talked about work stuff mostly," he told investigators, his voice steady. "A difficult patient, scheduled changes, normal things. She seemed fine. Maybe a little tired from the double shift." "Did she mention any plans? Stopping anywhere on the way home?" Lewis asked. Mark paused briefly. "She mentioned needing to grab something from home before bed. Didn't say what." When pressed for further details, Mark couldn't recall the exact time they'd parted or whether Sarah had stopped to speak with anyone else. He'd gone straight to Callahan's, a bar near the hospital where he met friends every Thursday night. Security footage confirmed his arrival at 11:40 p.m., placing him at the bar when Sarah's car was abandoned. A week into the investigation, the case had stalled. No witnesses had come forward claiming to have seen anything unusual on Route 16 that night. No suspicious transactions appeared on Sarah's credit cards or bank accounts. Her phone records showed her last call had been to her sister Rachel at 6:12 p.m. A brief conversation about weekend plans that ended normally. The physical search expanded to include the woods surrounding the spot where Sarah's car was found. Teams of volunteers combed through underbrush and drainage ditches looking for any sign of the missing nurse. Dogs tracked her scent to the bridge over Clearwater Creek before losing it. Divers searched the murky waters below but found nothing. The only potential evidence emerged on the third day when a volunteer spotted a hospital ID badge caught in driftwood approximately half a mile downstream from the bridge. Though partially damaged by water, forensics determined it could be Sarah's. The lanyard it was attached to matched the type used at St. Jude Medical Center, but the badge itself was too degraded for conclusive identification. DNA testing was inconclusive. As October gave way to November, Sarah Whitcomb's disappearance settled into an uncomfortable limbo. Not enough evidence existed to classify it as a homicide, yet the circumstances strongly suggested she hadn't left voluntarily. Police Chief Ronald Everett held a press conference 2 weeks after she vanished, his reassurances sounding increasingly hollow. "We are doing everything possible to locate Ms. Whitcomb," he told the assembled reporters, his expression grave beneath the unforgiving lights. "At this time, we have no indication of foul play, but we continue to explore all possibilities." That phrase, "no indication of foul play," would be repeated in subsequent press briefings, quoted in newspaper articles, and eventually etched into the collective consciousness of Bridgewater itself. It became the town's way of processing the unthinkable. A young woman had vanished without trace from their quiet streets, and no one knew why. For Rachel Whitcomb, the weeks following her sister's disappearance passed in a haze of police interviews, desperate searches, and sleepless nights. She distributed flyers with Sarah's photo across 3 counties, called every hospital and shelter within a 100-mile radius, and created a website dedicated to finding her sister. She appeared on local news programs, her voice steady even as dark circles deepened beneath her eyes. "Someone knows something," she repeated in every interview. "Someone saw something that night. Please, if you have any information, no matter how small it seems, call the tip line." But as November turned to December, the tips slowed to a trickle. The searches grew smaller, less frequent. The media moved on to fresher tragedies. Sarah's case file grew thick with interview transcripts and forensic reports that led nowhere. The truth of what happened that rainy October night seemed to have disappeared as completely as Sarah herself. Officer Helen Lewis continued to pursue leads long after her superiors had shifted focus to newer cases. She conducted additional interviews with hospital staff, revisited the scene where Sarah's car was found, and compiled a detailed timeline of Sarah's last known movements. Her persistence earned her a reputation among colleagues as obsessive, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something obvious had been missed. "The scene was too clean," she noted in her personal case files. "Too controlled, almost sanitized. This wasn't random." But without evidence to support her instincts, Lewis found herself reassigned to other cases by spring 2005. Sarah Whitcomb's file was transferred to the cold case unit. Her status officially changed to missing, presumed dead. For 18 years, her disappearance remained one of Bridgewater's unsolved mysteries. A cautionary tale parents told teenagers about the dangers of driving alone at night. A ghost story that lingered in the collective memory of a town that preferred to think of itself as safe. Until a demolition crew uncovered something hidden behind the walls of an abandoned house. Something that would change everything. Bridgewater, Oregon looked different in 2022. The steel mill that had once employed nearly a third of the town's workforce had closed 5 years earlier, leaving behind a hollowed-out economy and a population half the size it had been in 2004. Boarded storefronts lined Main Street, where family businesses had once thrived. The median age had crept upward as young people sought opportunities elsewhere, leaving behind a town of empty nesters and retirees who remembered better days. James Miller had grown up in Bridgewater, but left after high school to study construction management in Seattle. He returned only after his father's death in 2020, taking over the family's small demolition business more out of duty than desire. At 35, he felt trapped in a town he'd once been desperate to escape, tearing down abandoned buildings to make way for developments that never seemed to materialize. The property on Cleveland Avenue was unremarkable. A craftsman-style house built in the 1940s, foreclosed after the mill closed, and left to deteriorate for years. The bank had finally sold it to a developer who planned to build duplexes, and Miller's crew was contracted to demolish the existing structure. "Should be straightforward," Miller told his team that morning as they surveyed the sagging porch and peeling paint. 2 days to tear down, another day to clear debris. The crew had been working for 4 hours, stripping interior fixtures before bringing in heavy equipment, when Miller's hammer broke through what appeared to be a solid wall in the upstairs hallway. Plaster dust billowed around him, and he coughed, waving it away from his face. When the air cleared, he found himself staring at a narrow cavity between the wall studs, a space that shouldn't have been there. "Hey, Mike," he called to his assistant. "Bring me a flashlight." The beam cut through shadows to reveal a cardboard box pushed against the back of the cavity. The words "Winter Storage" were written across the top in faded marker. Miller reached in and pulled it out, expecting to find old Christmas decorations or family photo albums abandoned by previous owners. Instead, he found something altogether more disturbing. Inside the box was a small collection of items. Several degraded VHS cassettes, their labels water-damaged and illegible, a blue scarf, once soft but now mildewed with age, and at the bottom, a black VHS camcorder, its plastic case yellowed with time. Miller turned it over in his hands, noticing two initials scratched into the side near the lens. SW. "Probably worthless," Mike commented, peering over Miller's shoulder. "Nobody uses those things anymore." Miller nodded absently, but something about the camera nagged at him. The initials seemed familiar, though he couldn't immediately place why. He set the box aside, intending to dispose of it with the rest of the debris, and continued working. It wasn't until that evening, sitting alone in his father's house with a beer, that realization struck. S.W. Sarah Whitcomb, the nurse who had disappeared when he was in high school. Her case had dominated local news for months, her photograph appearing on flyers throughout town. Miller remembered his mother discussing the case in hushed tones with neighbors, the collective shock that such a thing could happen in Bridgewater. He retrieved the box from his truck and examined the camcorder more carefully. The battery was long dead, but when he connected it to a power adapter scrounged from his father's collection of outdated electronics, a small red light blinked to life. The viewfinder screen remained dark, suggesting internal damage, but the tape deck whirred when he pressed the eject button. Inside was a VHS tape, unmarked except for a small piece of masking tape with 10/14 written in blue pen, October 14th. The date, Sarah Whitcomb, vanished. Miller's hands trembled slightly as he connected the camcorder to his father's old television set, using RCA cables that he'd almost thrown out during last year's cleanup. The screen filled with static, before resolving into a grainy image. A woman in a nurse's uniform, sitting in what appeared to be a hospital break room. She was perhaps in her late 20s, with shoulder-length brown hair and tired eyes that nevertheless crinkled when she smiled at the camera. "Testing, testing," she said, adjusting the frame. "I'm documenting my last few weeks here." She laughed softly, pushing hair behind her ear. "For whoever finds this first, hello from 2004. Miller felt a chill creep along his spine. The woman on the screen was unmistakably Sarah Whitcomb, alive and breathing, and utterly unaware that she would vanish the very day this footage was taken. He watched as she continued speaking, describing ordinary details about her shift, complaining good-naturedly about a difficult patient, mentioning plans for the weekend. It was mundane footage, exactly what you'd expect from someone casually recording their day. But as Miller continued watching, he noticed subtle oddities. Occasional jumps in the video suggested edits or pauses in recording, background noises, voices, footsteps, a door closing, seemed strangely amplified in some segments, as if someone had deliberately enhanced the audio. And beneath it all, a sense of unease that Miller couldn't articulate. Something in Sarah's posture, perhaps, or the way her eyes occasionally flicked toward someone off camera. She appeared relaxed on the surface, but there was tension in her shoulders, a barely perceptible tightness around her mouth when she wasn't speaking directly to the camera. The final segment showed Sarah leaving the hospital, the camera apparently positioned on her car's dashboard. She smiled tiredly, rain visible on the windshield behind her. End of shift, she narrated. Heading home now, it's pouring out there. The timestamp in the corner read 11:23 p.m., 6 minutes after security cameras had recorded her exit from the building and nearly 30 minutes before her car would be found abandoned on Route 16. Miller's television screen abruptly filled with static as the tape ended. He sat motionless, cold beer forgotten in his hand, trying to process what he'd just witnessed. This wasn't just some random recording found in an abandoned house. This was potentially evidence in a cold case, a glimpse of a missing woman's final hours preserved for 18 years behind a false wall. The following morning, Miller contacted the Bridgewater Police Department. The detective who took his call sounded skeptical at first. The department received occasional tips about the Whitcomb case, most proving to be dead ends, but agreed to send someone to review the footage. Detective Marcus Sorensen arrived within the hour, a tall man with graying temples and the careful movements of someone who had seen too much to be easily surprised. He viewed the tape in silence, occasionally pausing to make notes, his expression giving away nothing. "You found this inside a wall cavity?" he asked when the footage ended. Miller nodded. "Hidden behind drywall that looked original to the house. I almost threw it away." "Do you know who owned the property in 2004? "Bank records say it belonged to someone named Alan Prescott. He lost it to foreclosure in 2011. Died a couple years later in Portland, I think." Sorensen made another note. "Any connection to Sarah Whitcomb that you're aware of?" "Not that I know of. I was in high school when she disappeared. Didn't know her personally." The detective rewound the tape, freezing on a frame where Sarah's face was clearly visible. "I'm going to need to take this and the other items you found. They're potential evidence in an ongoing investigation." "I thought the case was cold." "Cases like this are never truly closed," Sorensen replied, his tone measured. "Just waiting for new information." Within hours of Miller's discovery, the machinery of investigation had lurched back to life. The camcorder and tapes were transferred to the state crime lab for analysis. Property records for the Cleveland Avenue house were pulled. And most significantly, Rachel Whitcomb, now 38 years old and teaching high school English in Seattle, received a phone call she had both dreaded and hoped for over 18 years. "We may have found new evidence in your sister's case," Detective Sorensen told her. "It's preliminary, but we'd like you to come in." Rachel arrived in Bridgewater the following day, having taken emergency leave from her teaching position. The town felt simultaneously familiar and foreign as she drove down streets she hadn't visited in years. She had left shortly after Sarah's disappearance had been classified a cold case, unable to bear the mixture of pity and morbid curiosity that followed her in a town too small to forget who she was. Now she found herself sitting in the same police station where she had first reported her sister missing, facing a detective she had never met, about to watch footage of Sarah recorded on the day she vanished. "I should warn you," Sorensen said gently. "This may be difficult to watch, not because of any graphic content, but because it's her," Rachel finished. "Alive, I understand." But understanding intellectually couldn't prepare her for the emotional impact of seeing Sarah's face appear on the screen. The sister she had lost, breathing and talking and laughing, preserved in grainy VHS like a time capsule from another life. Rachel pressed her fingers against her mouth, tears spilling silently down her cheeks as Sarah's voice filled the small conference room. "That's her," she whispered unnecessarily. "That's Sarah." She watched the entire tape twice, struggling to maintain composure while searching for any clue that might explain what had happened that night. On the second viewing, she noticed details that had escaped her initial shock. The way Sarah kept checking her watch, the nervous glance over her shoulder as she left the building, the slight tremor in her hand as she adjusted the camera on the dashboard. "She seems anxious," Rachel noted. "Not like herself." Sorensen nodded. We noticed that too. The question is why? Has anyone from her work seen this footage yet? Someone who would have been there that day? Not yet. We wanted your confirmation first that it's genuinely Sarah. Our next step is interviewing hospital staff who worked with her. Rachel hesitated, then asked the question that had been forming since she first learned of the tape's existence. Do you think whoever had this camera might be responsible for what happened to her? The detective's expression remained carefully neutral. It's a possibility we're exploring. The camera was found in a house owned by Alan Prescott, who died in 2015. We're investigating any connection he might have had to your sister. And the other tapes? Have you watched those too? The lab is still working on them. Most were badly degraded, but they're using specialized equipment to recover what they can. Rachel nodded slowly. I want to see them all. Whatever's on them, I need to know. Of course, Sorensen agreed, but I should prepare you. This case is reopening in a significant way. It means revisiting everything, including difficult questions about your sister's relationships and activities. Are you ready for that? Rachel met his gaze steadily, the years of uncertainty having hardened something inside her. Detective, I've lived with questions for 18 years. What I'm not ready for is another 18 without answers. While Rachel prepared herself for the painful process of resurrecting her sister's final days, the investigation was already gathering momentum. Forensic technicians worked to recover data from the damaged tapes, using techniques that hadn't existed when Sarah first disappeared. Detectives reviewed the original case files, noting discrepancies and unexplored angles with fresh eyes. Helen Lewis, the officer who had initially investigated Sarah's disappearance, was located living in Eugene, having retired from police work 5 years earlier. Now in her early 60s, she arrived at the Bridgewater station with a banker's box of personal case notes and a determination that belied her age. I knew something was wrong about that case, she told Sorensen during their initial meeting. The scene was too clean. Her car was too perfect, but I couldn't get anyone to listen. We're listening now, Sorensen assured her. Every detail matters. Together, they revisited the timeline of October 14, 2004, integrating the new video evidence with original witness statements. The tape confirmed Sarah had left the hospital at approximately 11:17 p.m., consistent with security footage. She had begun recording in her car at 11:23 p.m., and the tape continued until 11:53 p.m., significantly later than investigators had originally believed she disappeared. This discovery introduced a crucial question. Where had Sarah been during those 30 minutes? Her car had been found just 2 miles from the hospital, a drive that should have taken less than 5 minutes. The timestamp suggested she had either stopped somewhere or driven a different route entirely. The forensic lab provided another breakthrough 2 days later. Enhancement of the final minutes of footage revealed reflections in the car window, movements that suggested someone else was present outside the vehicle. In one frame, frozen and magnified, the partial outline of a man's profile was visible. Average height, wearing what appeared to be a dark jacket. Too blurry for identification, but clear enough to confirm Sarah hadn't been alone. Most significantly, the audio technicians isolated background noise from the final segment, enhancing a voice barely audible beneath the sound of rain on the windshield. You don't have to tell anyone about this, Sarah, please. The voice was male, quiet, but insistent. Sarah's response was lost to static, but her expression in the subsequent frames showed increasing distress before the recording abruptly ended. When the voice pattern was analyzed against samples from the original investigation, a match emerged that sent shockwaves through the investigative team. Mark Daniels, Sarah's colleague, and the last person known to have seen her alive. Mark had remained in Bridgewater after Sarah's disappearance, advancing from nurse to paramedic supervisor at St. Jude Medical Center. He had married, had 2 children, and built a reputation as a dedicated healthcare professional and community volunteer. Nothing in his subsequent life suggested connection to a potential crime 18 years earlier, yet the evidence was compelling enough to warrant a closer look. Detective Sorensen reviewed Mark's original statements from 2004, noting inconsistencies that seemed minor at the time, but took on new significance in light of the recovered footage. Mark had claimed he last saw Sarah in the hospital parking lot at approximately 11:20 p.m., after which he went directly to Callahan's bar, arriving around 11:40 p.m. Security footage had confirmed his presence at the bar, establishing what appeared to be a solid alibi. But the newly discovered video showed Sarah recording until 11:53 p.m., and the voice identified as Mark's suggesting secrecy about something unspecified. "We need to review that bar footage again," Sorensen told Lewis. "The original, not just the stills in the file." But when they requested the security tape from the evidence archive, they discovered something troubling. It was missing. The evidence log showed it had been checked out in January 2005 and never returned. The chain of custody form bore the signature of Officer Ronald Everett, the same man who would later become police chief and who had insisted there was no indication of foul play in Sarah's disappearance. The coincidence was too significant to ignore. Sorensen immediately expanded the investigation to include a review of Everett's involvement in the original case. Now retired and living in Arizona, Everett was contacted by phone and asked to explain the missing evidence. His response was dismissive. "That was 18 years ago," he told Sorensen. "Tapes got misplaced all the time back then. Nothing sinister about it." But when pressed about his relationship with Mark Daniels, Everett became defensive. "Mark's a good man. Been serving this community for decades. I'm not going to help you drag his name through the mud over some misinterpreted video." The response raised more questions than it answered. Why was a senior officer so protective of a witness in a missing persons case? What connection existed between them that might have influenced the original investigation? While Sorensen pursued these new angles, the forensic lab made yet another critical discovery. One of the degraded tapes from the hidden cache had been partially recovered, revealing footage that appeared to have been recorded on the same night as Sarah's disappearance, but from a different perspective. This tape showed exterior shots of what appeared to be Sarah's apartment building, recorded from a parked car. The timestamp indicated it was filmed between 9:30 and 10:45 p.m., before Sarah's shift ended. The camera occasionally zoomed in on specific windows, lingering on one that Rachel confirmed belonged to Sarah's unit. Most disturbing was a segment near the end where the camera captured Sarah's car pulling into her usual parking space after midnight, at least 30 minutes after her abandoned vehicle had been discovered on Route 16. A figure that appeared to be Sarah exited the car and entered the building, but the angle and distance made positive identification impossible. "This doesn't make sense," Rachel said, viewing the footage with growing horror. "Sarah couldn't have driven home if her car was found on the highway." "Unless it wasn't her car that was found initially," Lewis suggested. "Or wasn't her driving this one?" The implications were staggering. Either the original discovery of Sarah's car had been misreported, or someone had used her spare key to move a different vehicle to her apartment complex, creating the illusion she had returned home safely. But who would have access to Sarah's keys? And why construct such an elaborate deception? The answer emerged from an unexpected source. James Miller, continuing the demolition of the Cleveland Avenue house, discovered a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards in the master bedroom. Inside was a small tin box containing various items: a hospital ID badge belonging to Sarah Whitcomb, a silver keyring with a wolf charm, and several Polaroid photographs of Sarah taken without her knowledge, at work, shopping, entering her apartment building. The discovery transformed the investigation from a missing persons cold case to a potential homicide, with evidence of stalking and premeditation. It also provided concrete evidence linking the house's former owner Alan Prescott, to Sarah's disappearance. Background checks revealed Prescott had worked as a maintenance contractor for Sarah's apartment complex in 2004, giving him access to keys and intimate knowledge of residents' routines. But Alan Prescott had been dead for 7 years. If he was responsible for Sarah's disappearance, he had taken the full truth to his grave. Unless the remaining tapes contained confessions or revealed her fate. Sarah's final hours might remain forever unknown. The investigation now focused on establishing connections between Prescott, Mark Daniels, and former Chief Everett. Financial records showed payments from Everett to Prescott for home repairs in early 2005, unusually large sums for typical maintenance work. Mark Daniels' phone records from 2004, subpoenaed from the archived case file, showed multiple calls to a number registered to Prescott in the weeks before Sarah's disappearance. The web of connections grew more complex when Helen Lewis uncovered notes from her original investigation that had never made it into the official file. An anonymous caller had reported seeing a silver sedan stopped on Route 16 the night Sarah vanished, with 2 silhouettes visible inside. The tip had been marked not credible and buried without follow-up. The officer who had taken the call and dismissed it? Ronald Everett. When confronted with this evidence during a formal interview, Everett's composed facade finally cracked. "You don't understand," he said, his voice tight. This town needed closure, not an open-ended investigation that would drag on for years. Sometimes it's better to let things rest. "Even if it means covering up a crime?" Sorensen pressed. Everett looked away. "I didn't cover anything up. I made a judgment call about resources and community well-being." But the mounting evidence suggested otherwise. Bit by bit, a different picture of October 14, 2004 was emerging. One that contradicted the official narrative that had stood unchallenged for 18 years. The final piece fell into place when the forensic lab recovered a segment from the last tape in the hidden cache. Badly damaged and only partially viewable, it nevertheless contained crucial footage. Sarah arriving home after her shift, her car pulling into the parking space outside her apartment building. The camera, positioned inside the car, captured her relief at reaching her destination safely. "Made it?" she murmured, gathering her purse and reaching for the door handle. Then her expression changed, fear flashing across her features as headlights appeared in her rearview mirror. The camera shook as she turned, capturing another vehicle pulling up behind her, blocking her exit. A male figure approached quickly, his face briefly visible as he reached her window. Mark Daniels. "I just want to talk." His voice came through clearly. Sarah's breathing quickened. The image trembled. "Mark, please, you're scaring me." The camera captured his expression, changing from placating to something harder, more determined. "You said you wouldn't tell anyone. You promised." Static consumed the next few seconds. When the image returned, the camera had fallen, recording at an angle that showed only partial figures and shadows. Sarah's voice panicked now. "Stop it. Let me go." The sound of a struggle. A door opening. Then a scream, cut short as the tape ended. The recovered footage provided enough evidence for a warrant. Mark Daniels was arrested at the medical center where he had worked for 22 years, led out past shocked colleagues in handcuffs. His home was searched, revealing nothing immediately incriminating, but a thorough examination of his garage uncovered traces of blood beneath layers of paint on the concrete floor. DNA analysis confirmed it was Sarah's. When confronted with the evidence, Mark's carefully constructed life began to unravel. His wife, stunned by the arrest, revealed that Mark had insisted on renovating their garage immediately after they purchased the house in 2005, personally applying multiple layers of epoxy coating to the floor. "He always kept it so clean," she told detectives through tears. I used to joke that he could perform surgery in there." Under sustained interrogation, Mark finally broke. "She wasn't supposed to scream," he muttered, staring at his hands. "It wasn't supposed to go that far." His confession, recorded over 8 hours, painted a disturbing picture of obsession and entitlement. He had become fixated on Sarah shortly after she joined the hospital staff, interpreting her professional friendliness as personal interest. When she began dating someone else, his fixation had transformed into something darker. He described following her, learning her routines, even making a copy of her car key when she left her purse unattended during shifts. The night she disappeared, he had confronted her about a complaint she had filed with hospital administration, a report of uncomfortable attention that threatened his career advancement. "She said she was going to tell everyone," he explained, voice hollow, "that I'd been watching her, following her. She didn't understand that I was protecting her." The confrontation had turned physical when Sarah attempted to flee. Mark admitted to striking her, claiming her death was accidental, the result of a fall during their struggle. But the calculated cleanup that followed belied any claim of accident. He had enlisted Alan Prescott, who owed him favors from previous arrangements, to help dispose of evidence and create false alibis. Ronald Everett's involvement had come later, after he recognized inconsistencies in Mark's statements. Rather than pursuing these red flags, Everett had chosen to protect Mark, his niece's former boyfriend, and a man he had mentored through community programs. "People make mistakes," Everett told Sorensen during his final interview, "and sometimes the truth hurts more than the lie ever did." But for Rachel Whitcomb, the truth, however painful, brought long-sought answers. Standing outside the courthouse after Mark's arraignment, she faced a wall of reporters with quiet dignity. "My sister wasn't just missing," she said, her voice steady. "She was erased. By people this town trusted, by a system that valued comfort over justice. But the truth was always there, waiting to be found." The case against Mark Daniels was built on both the recovered footage and forensic evidence from his garage. Traces of Sarah's blood had seeped into the concrete despite his attempts to cover it, and soil samples matched minerals found along Clearwater Creek, where her hospital badge had been discovered years earlier. During the trial, Rachel testified about the warning signs she had missed. Mark's constant presence at Sarah's workplace events, his insistence on walking her to her car, his knowledge of her schedule and routines that seemed excessive even for a close colleague. "He didn't hide in the dark," she told the jury. "He stood in the light where no one would look." The verdict came after just 6 hours of deliberation. Guilty of second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and obstruction of justice. The sentence, 25 years to life, couldn't restore what had been lost, but it provided a measure of accountability that had been denied for nearly 2 decades. Ronald Everett faced separate charges for his role in the cover-up, eventually pleading guilty to tampering with evidence and official misconduct. His reputation destroyed, he served 18 months of a 3-year sentence before being released on parole, a shadow of the respected officer he had once been. The final piece of the puzzle emerged during sentencing, when Mark revealed what had happened to Sarah's remains. Following her death, he and Prescott had transported her body to a remote area outside town limits, burying her in the forest where development was planned. The site had been cleared and built over years ago, making recovery impossible. For Bridgewater, the case represented a painful reckoning with collective silence. The town had embraced a comfortable narrative about a random disappearance, rather than confronting the possibility that danger had lived among them, wearing a familiar face. The truth forced a re-evaluation of other unexamined assumptions, other instances where convenience had trumped justice. In the months following the trial, Rachel established an advocacy network for long-term missing persons cases, emphasizing the importance of revisiting cold cases with new technology and perspectives. The Sarah Whitcomb Foundation funded forensic training for small-town police departments and supported families navigating the limbo of unresolved disappearances. Detective Sorensen and Helen Lewis collaborated on comprehensive reforms to evidence handling procedures, ensuring that critical materials could no longer disappear without accountability. Their work became a model for departments across the state, Ikimamilstein, a legacy born from failure. James Miller preserved the Cleveland Avenue House's foundation, convincing developers to incorporate a small memorial garden where the property once stood. A simple stone marker read "Truth Endures." It became a quiet place of reflection for a community still coming to terms with its role in a tragedy hidden for too long. On the anniversary of Sarah's disappearance, Rachel visited the memorial alone, placing fresh flowers beside the marker. The autumn rain fell softly around her, not unlike the night her sister had vanished 18 years earlier. But unlike that night, there were no more secrets hiding in the shadows, no more lies obscuring what had happened. As she turned to leave, Rachel noticed a small group of hospital staff gathered at the garden's edge. Nurses who had worked with Sarah, newer employees who had joined long after her disappearance. They nodded respectfully, acknowledging both her presence and the weight of what this place represented. It was a small gesture, but significant, a community finally willing to see what had been there all along. The VHS tapes that had revealed the truth were preserved in the state archive, digitized to prevent further degradation. The final moments of Sarah's recorded voice. If you're seeing this, it means someone finally listened. Became the closing line of a documentary about her case and its impact on investigative practices nationwide. For 18 years, everyone had asked where Sarah went, but the real question had always been, who made her disappear? The answer had been hiding in plain sight, preserved in analog dust, waiting for the right moment to be found. Just as the truth, no matter how deeply buried, eventually finds its way to light. Sarah Whitcomb's disappearance wasn't just a single moment of violence. It was the culmination of patterns that had been developing for months, perhaps years. In hindsight, these warning signs seem obvious, glaring red flags that should have triggered immediate concern. But in the moment, isolated and viewed through the lens of familiarity, they appeared benign, even caring. Her case wasn't unique. It followed patterns seen in countless other disappearances, where subtle warning signs were misinterpreted or dismissed until it was too late. Understanding these patterns doesn't just solve cold cases. It can prevent future tragedies. Here are the 5 warning signs that everyone missed in Sarah's case. Every night, Sarah followed the same route home. Same road, same gas station, same cassette in her car's radio. She stopped at the same traffic lights, parked in the same spot, and entered her apartment building through the same door. Her life ran like clockwork, a necessity, she thought, for managing her demanding nursing shifts. But that predictability made her vulnerable. She wasn't just living her life, she was following a script someone else could memorize. Sarah was methodical, her sister Rachel later testified. You could set your watch by her schedule. If she said she'd be home at midnight, she was home at 11:58. This reliability, once considered a virtue, became the blueprint for her abduction. Mark Daniels didn't need to stalk her actively. He simply needed to observe her long enough to identify patterns she followed without variation. Real-life example: her car was found parked neatly 2 miles from her home, doors locked, purse inside, no signs of struggle, only precision. This wasn't random. It was executed by someone who knew exactly where and when to intercept her. Warning: predictability makes visibility easy for whoever is watching. The same routine that brings comfort can become a trap when someone's intent on using it. Varying routes, times, and patterns, even slightly, can disrupt a potential predator's ability to anticipate your movements. In every photo from hospital events, in every interview after her disappearance, one person lingered at the edges of Sarah's story: Mark Daniels, her co-worker and close friend. He volunteered during search efforts. He comforted her family. He spoke warmly about Sarah to investigators, sharing small details that suggested intimate knowledge of her life. He was the consummate concerned friend, always available, always helpful. Mark was always there, remembered Diane Murphy, the charge nurse. If Sarah needed a ride, if she needed to switch shifts, if she just needed someone to talk to during break, we all thought it was sweet. What appeared as friendship was actually surveillance disguised as support. His constant presence normalized behavior that should have raised concerns. Knowing her schedule without being told, appearing at places she frequented, inserting himself into her personal life. Real-life example. Years later, investigators learned Mark had keys to Sarah's apartment. For emergencies, he claimed when questioned. The recovered VHS footage later revealed his presence in places he shouldn't have been, including her driveway the night she disappeared. Warning: sometimes danger doesn't knock on the door. It already has the keys. True friendship respects boundaries. When someone consistently positions themselves within your personal space, physically or emotionally, without invitation, it's not coincidence. It's calculation. Police initially cleared Mark because his story was airtight. Camera footage showed him at Callahan's bar from 11:40 p.m. until closing time. Witnesses confirmed his presence. His timeline left no room for involvement in Sarah's disappearance. But the VHS tape uncovered something different. The bar's timestamp had been tampered with, spliced seamlessly using analog editing techniques common in the early 2000s. His perfect alibi had been manufactured with the help of Alan Prescott, who had experience with video equipment, and protected by Ronald Everett, who ensured the original tape disappeared from evidence. In retrospect, that should have been our first clue, Helen Lewis admitted years later. Real alibis have rough edges. They have unexplained minutes, fuzzy memories, inconsistent details. Mark's story was polished like a gemstone. No imperfections anywhere. Real-life example. When forensic analysts restored the damaged VHS footage, faint audio matched Mark's voice, reciting what sounded like a rehearsed alibi. The same phrases he would later use in police interviews, word for word, as if he had practiced them in advance. Warning: when someone's story fits too perfectly, it often means they had time to rehearse it. Authentic recollections contain gaps and inconsistencies. Perfection isn't clarity, it's construction. After Sarah's disappearance, Bridgewater closed ranks. The police chief was an old family friend of the Daniels. The press coverage dwindled after a month. Anonymous tips went uninvestigated. Witnesses who reported seeing Mark's car near Sarah's apartment were discouraged from filing formal statements. People said, "It's better not to ask." But silence doesn't heal, it preserves rot. There was this unspoken understanding, James Miller recalled during the trial. Sarah was gone, and dwelling on it just hurt the town's image. We were supposed to move on, focus on the positive. Anyone who kept asking questions was seen as morbid or attention-seeking. This collective silence wasn't just apathy, it was active protection of a comfortable narrative. Bridgewater preferred believing in a random tragedy rather than confronting the possibility that evil wore a familiar face. Real-life example. Public records later showed anonymous calls reporting Sarah's car location days before it was officially discovered. None were followed up. When a hospital administrator mentioned Sarah had filed an informal complaint about workplace harassment weeks before her disappearance, the report was misplaced until the case was reopened 18 years later. Warning: communities often protect comfort over truth. When denial becomes collective, corruption hides. In plain sight, The pressure to move on or not make trouble serves those who benefit from keeping secrets buried. The final revelation. The VHS recovered from the attic. Recorded through the lens of Sarah's own camcorder, it captured fragments of her final day. Laughter at work, the winding road home, headlights appearing in her rearview mirror. It revealed her growing awareness that something wasn't right. The nervous glances, checking door locks, keeping her phone close. The footage showed Sarah had begun documenting Mark's behavior, creating evidence of his increasingly uncomfortable attention. She had sensed danger before anyone else recognized it. But the last minutes showed something chilling. A confrontation on her doorstep. Someone she knew, someone she trusted. The tape cuts to static mid-scream. She knew, Rachel said, watching the footage through tears. She was trying to protect herself the only way she could, by creating a record. She just didn't realize how quickly he would act. Warning: time doesn't erase evidence. It only hides it, waiting for the right pair of eyes to press play. Trust your instincts when they tell you something isn't right, and create contemporaneous records of concerning behavior. The documentation you make today could be the evidence that brings truth to light tomorrow. For 18 years, everyone believed Sarah Whitcomb simply vanished, but the VHS tape proved that truth has a way of surviving, even when those sworn to protect it bury it under layers of dust and denial. The 5 warning signs weren't just clues in a case, they're lessons about vigilance, routine, and misplaced trust. Each one teaches us that danger often wears the face of the familiar. Sarah's story reminds us that predators don't always lurk in shadows. Sometimes they stand in plain sight, hiding behind badges of trust. The colleague who's always helpful, the friend who's always available, the authority figure whose word goes unquestioned. Her case also reveals how communities become complicit through silence. Bridgewater's collective desire for comfort, for a narrative that preserved their sense of safety, allowed a killer to walk free among them for 18 years. The town's failure wasn't just in missing the signs, it was in actively looking away from them. Perhaps most importantly, Sarah's story illustrates that time doesn't erase truth. The evidence she created, the documentation she left behind, eventually found its way to light. Her own foresight, recording what she sensed was wrong, ultimately brought her justice, even if she couldn't be there to see it. Don't ignore the details that don't quite fit. Sometimes they're the only thing standing between disappearance and discovery. Trust the voice inside that whispers caution when someone crosses boundaries, when helpfulness feels suffocating, when coincidences pile up too neatly. And remember, the past is never as quiet as it seems. Buried truths wait patiently, gathering power in silence until someone finally presses play.